We now have employees, federal employees who refuse to come to the office. And what are they doing at home? Well, if they weren't working that hard at work, what are they doing at home? They're binging on Netflix. God knows who knows. There's something really wrong here. There is a new sheriff in DOGE City. Is DOGE a work trauma act? Yes, but probably not the way you're thinking it. But the bigger question is, how the heck did we get here that we have to look at something like DOGE? So on this episode, what I'm going to do is talk about DOGE and how it works in terms of being a work trauma issue. Hello, I'm Michael Denisoff, CEO and Principal Director of Denisoff Consulting Group. And welcome to Season 2. This is a special episode of Work Trauma, How Corporations Really Work. It's about DOGE. And I've been getting a lot of questions about DOGE. I didn't really want to talk about it at first because government is not really like business, but it is like business and it's an organization. A lot of people kept on asking me my opinion on it. So I'm going to give my opinion on it, very much so through the lens of work trauma. So I want to do this, but I'm telling you right now, this is not going to be a political take, right? This is not a political podcast. I'm not particularly a political person. I'm kind of a thinking person, and I like to look at policy and how things work. So I want to be very clear with everybody. We're going to take this discussion purely from a business and business effectiveness point of view, not from a political view in any way. So if you want me to get political, I'm not going to do it. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind, all right? And if you want to read politics into this or come here, don't do it, okay? So there'll be no discussion if DOGE is constitutional or if Elon Musk is a good guy. I'm not doing that, okay? I'm here strictly to talk about the organization of the federal government and how it relates to work trauma, because it's actually turned out to be a great example of it. So our first step is really to give a context to what is happening, right? The first context is this, for sure. Getting laid off is awful, okay? Whether you're in a small company, a large company, the government, getting laid off is awful. So I feel for the folks who are going to get laid off. And in the end, it's, even when you get fired and you deserve it, it's still sucky, right? You have to own it, but it still sucks. So let's start with that, okay? I feel bad for people, anybody who gets laid off ever, even for any reason, even if it's their own fault. I feel less sorry for them, but you know what I'm saying. But the problem is we have to look at, or the challenge for us here is to look at the government and how it's run. And like all organizations, small business, large corporations, government, nonprofits, churches, civic organizations, etc., they should all strive to be run well. There should be really little. There should be no fraud, abuse, or waste, right? And same thing with the government. There should be no. It should be run well, run effectively, run to be a high-performing team. But the reality is government agencies are not like that. They're not. There is a lot of fraud and abuse. If you've been hearing some of the stuff we've been spending money on as a country, that's abuse. That's fraud. Okay. I'm saying money. I'm talking millions and billions in some cases. And you ask, well, where'd it go? I don't know. No company in the world, even the worst run company in the world, will not let you get away with that. So that's the problem here. And the issue I have particularly with the government and how it's run is a lot of times government agencies will say, we have to pay government workers to be competitive with Google and Facebook. Guess what? At Google and Facebook, you can get fired. In the government, you can't get fired. So it's not a real thing. It's not a one-to-one comparison, right? In the old days, when I was a younger man, right, the best and brightest didn't necessarily go into the government in some places, for sure, and there's exceptions to this, and I would pull the military out. I would say I would pull some of the security agencies out, but we just heard about all the craziness about a tech strand going on at NSA, all right? But government agencies, man, they should be run well. But they're not. There are a lot of bad things that go on in these agencies. All right, and we know this intrinsically true. If you ever had to call if you have to call the IRS or when I was in my previous job, I had to call the EO. So nobody answers the phone. So what's going on here? So we know that there's very little accountability in government agencies, right? It's hard to get work done. There's endless jokes about that. Nobody answers the phone when you call in. And if you do call in, you're going to be on hold at least for an hour, on any agency that you call into. And it's not because of staffing issues. It's precisely how it's run. So let's keep this all in perspective. Getting laid off stinks. Government agencies are not run well. They're just not. And let's talk about why. So let's talk about why they're not high-performing organizations. All right. First of all, real companies, right? Real companies, private companies, small companies, privately owned companies are directly accountable to the shareholders, right? Or the owners or the board, right? Or at least a CEO. There's something that they're accountable to, that they're a little afraid of. If they don't do a good job, they're going to be fired. And the reality is government agencies, government workers are directly accountable to the citizens, except it's not direct. It's really indirect, because what citizen has enough time to watch over the government agencies? Plus, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors put up so you can't see what's really going on. So, and most of us are busy with our daily lives, working hard, working at our own jobs, taking care of families. We don't have another full-time job ability to track the government. Okay, so these agencies are not run by savvy leaders, great leaders. They're hired by they're run by political leaders and bureaucrats, right? And when a bureaucrat or anybody is any job for too long, there just comes entitlement. There comes, I know better. I don't have to do anything. It's my job. It's my world. It's not. It's the world of the citizens. So we need to do that. So direct oversight by the citizens aren't there. So the organizations can get really, really wacky, right? And we have no choice as people or the citizens of the U.S. to really hold those accountable. Kind of, we rely on other things, rely on AGs, some ethics boards, but often they're populated by people that don't really matter, right? That aren't doing their job. All right. But fundamentally, why I thought this would be finally a good topic for work trauma is that my thesis that leadership, whether it be executives in a big company, or these leaders in companies or politicians really, is their whole purpose is not to have things run well or corporations to be successful. Their whole purpose is to keep their status, keep their title. It's about preserving, right, and keeping what they have and building their prestige. And we see that. We see that, of course, with private companies, particularly the large companies. You hear me talking about that all the time, almost every issue. But this is particularly true in the government. Politicians, think about it. As soon as they win an election, they don't go, yeah, man, I'm going to get to work and really help out my constituents. No, they start thinking, man, my next election is in 4 years or in 6 years. I gotta start preparing for that. So right away, they're not helping out the company, in this case, the government, the people. They're worried about keeping and their status, right? And that's why all this stuff always goes down to, they want to keep the status quo. And the status quo is, I'm the CEO, I want to keep in power. I'm the bureaucrat, I'm going to keep in the power. I'm the party in charge, I want to keep in power. And so that's where this comes to. All right. Also, real companies grow and perform based on meeting a need, right? So there's a need, right? There's a need for sneakers, we have Nike. If there's needs for cars, we have the different car makers. So they have to meet a need. And if they do it particularly well and for a fair price, they do well as an organization and their value goes up, particularly in stock prices, right? Now, federal governments, they don't have to turn a profit. Matter of fact, most of them are terribly unprofitable, either directly, the post office, which has not been profitable for as long as I've been alive. So what are we doing with it? And the other companies, you could say profit means they're performing their job to an excellent level. Okay, so we know that government agencies, most part, don't do this, right? And when you have this lack of drive to be high performing and this lack of accountability, it's a slippery slope, right? And then fundamentally, it just kind of degrades and it becomes ripe for things like abuse and fraud and money laundering, right? Or just giving political appointing favors. You got these people who are given to be in charge of agencies that have no business being there. And the most obvious one, again, this is not a political statement because both parties do this, was during Katrina. And we found out the head of FEMA was a guy named Brownie. Good job, Brownie. Brownie had no business being there. He had no emergency background. He ran dog kennel shows. And he was, I'm sure he's a big donor and a friend of the president. So he got this cherry job to run FEMA, and he was a disaster. But that's not an isolated case. This is how it works. All right, so real companies have to perform. When the government doesn't perform, nobody gets fired, right? There's rooms of people, both at federal and state and county level, people who aren't performing. They should be fired, but the unions have made it such that they can't be fired, and they come to work every day and they sit in a room not doing a job, collecting their paycheck while their investigation is pending. Some of these investigations go on for 8 years or just never end. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right. So companies often grow and are successful, right? And they have to they will often recede and they have to reinvent. Government agencies rarely reinvent. I mean, we have legacy computer systems that are from the 60s and 70s still in place. So why? Well, there's no pressure for these agencies to be great, to perform really well. Again, there are examples and exceptions for sure, but that's not the rule. The rule is that they're way outdated with the process, how they do it, with their legacy systems from the 60s and 70s. No other company in the world could get away with that. So you see the pattern here? And I'm not cramming the people, by the way. I'm cramming the leadership. Right? We'll talk about that. All right. I kind of hit on this already. People cannot get fired in the government. One time I was talking to a high-level GSA officer, and I just asked him straight up, do people get fired? And he said, quote, no, unless it's murder. And even that, we have some people still here. So it's very impossible to get fired from an organization. So if you have no fear of getting fired, no matter how good you or how bad you do, are you going to work that hard? And if you're a high performer, are you going to work that hard knowing that this guy, this lady over here is doing way less work than you, showing less motivation, less proactivity, and they're going to get paid the same as you? And maybe you'll get bumped up a little bit, right? But you'll ceiling out because unless you're politically connected, you're going to ceiling out because that's how it works, okay? So in time, the whole drive to be great as an organization, this recedes, okay? And that's just real. I mean, there's a reason why we have these legacy stories about the government. It's true. And yes, I'm not going to go into this. Unions play a big role of that. Why we have a federal union is crazy. It's ridiculous. It's one of the worst things that happened to the government. All right. And like I said, if you can't get fired, you should not get paid. You can't say, oh, we got to compete with Google and Facebook and all these tech firms to get the best, brightest talent. Google will fire your butt if you don't perform. Facebook will fire you if you don't perform. Government, you're not going to get fired. So there's a whole different level of expectations and performance. So the pay should not be the same. So that argument is crazy. All right. So there's no accountability in the government agencies on steroids. Right. Again, I had this already, man. If a manager in any company was asked about a $500 expenditure, a $1,000 expenditure, let alone a $200 million expenditure, and said, "Yeah, I don't know where it is. I don't know what happened to it," they would not only get fired, they would probably get pressed for charges legally. Criminal charges would happen. This happened in the government. It's like, it's okay. It's crazy. All right. So you see the pattern here. It becomes a culture. And we constantly talk about culture, how it impacts a business. Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the people in the government. Again, I'm sure they're good people, but because they're not being pressed or trained properly, there's no real succession plan in the government, by the way, right? They have no motivation to get better or improve unless they want to get a promotion. Maybe there's some of that. I'm sure there's people that are just kind of driven like that. There's still some good people in government, but most of them are just going to hang out. You're putting in your time. I've talked to so many government workers. They're talking about their retirement and pension when they're in their mid-20s, which is crazy to me. Okay. Years ago, I think it was 2008, 2009, one of my big clients was getting audited. When I say big, it was probably a $600 million company. They got audited, and the lead person from the IRS did everything by hand and pads, meaning they didn't use Excel spreadsheets. They refused. They didn't want to learn them because I asked finally, like, why aren't you using Excel? Oh, I don't like computers. So the lead person is conducting an audit on a high-end company using pad and paper and ledgers and not using spreadsheets. And because of that, the audit took weeks longer than it should have. Right now, the workers, the direct reports of this person, they used Excel. So that kind of helped out a bit. But the main person refused to learn Excel. And they still have a job in the government? Yeah, because they've been there. There's special perks that go on that you can't lose your job. There's seniority. It's all that stuff that we assume that happens in a government agency. All right. Also, the contracting, this is a whole side story. I don't want to go into it too much. The government itself, it is rife with corruption. years ago, I did. I went through this very painful project of getting a contract, and it wasn't working. And I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? So finally, I got close to this one contracting officer, and I said to him, I said, hey, man. And listen, by the way, at this point, I wasn't married. I didn't have kids or anything. But I said to him, like, listen, I got a wife and 3 kids at home, man. I can't be wasting my time doing this if I'm never going to get a contract. And I said, I just spent 15 hours on this RFI. And I said, I haven't heard back from that. And he's like, because we won't even read it. We're just kind of collecting those to give the appearance that we have a competition for this contract. We already know who that contract is going to. If I were you, I'd get out of the government business. And I'm like, it was crazy. And he saw my facial expression, which was like that. And he said, and if you ever tell anybody this, I will deny it. So that was, 15, 20 years ago. So I'm not going to worry about it. I don't want to get him in trouble. He's probably retired, living in Margaritaville right now. But you know what I'm saying? So this is a trend, right? Right. Poor performance, right? Individuals are poor performers. But the bigger issue here is that it's a culture of poor performance, right? It's what it breeds. And so sometimes I got to tell you, when I hear some of these government workers like, we care, we don't, you don't, because I call in all the time. I've been through this. Years ago, when I was working at a company that would have been during the .com craziness, right? I had to work, one of my jobs working with getting people in from India and the H-1B visas. And I would call, I would call immigration. I would call them, nobody would call me. Somebody would call me back. They would never give me their real name. Matter of fact, this one person, I knew their voice. I know I talked to many times. Every time I talked to them, they gave me a different name because they didn't want to be tracked or held accountable. It's crazy, and it's worse than it was 20 years ago. All right. So the problem is government agencies will not be closed down, right? You can't close them down, which means we pay them more. We pay way more money than the value that they're giving us because they know they can never be closed down. Look at the post office. It's gone bankrupt or has been on the verge of bankrupt over and over and over. And we, the people, we bail them out without any substantial changes to leadership. Maybe we change out the top dog, but it's an issue, right? And it's the equivalent. It's like the equivalent. Years ago, which drove me nuts during 2008, the downturn. Too big to fail. Well, the government right now is too big to fail, right? It's the equivalent of it. That's why I hate airlines so much. I get on airlines a lot because they know they have a special agreement because of defense with the government that they will never be terminated, right? At least the big ones, right? They're too important to our national security. So they get away with a lot, and they got away with a lot during the pandemic. They laid off all these people and took a lot of money, right? And then they gave themselves bonuses, even though it was their worst year of performance in a long time. So why? They're too big. They're too important. We can't let the government agencies fail. We can't let the post office fail. And by connection, we can't let the airlines fail. So that's why airlines drive me nuts. All right. Like I said, I already addressed that. The government has to pay more to get the best and brightest. They're not getting the best and brightest. The best and brightest want to do better. They want to be held accountable. So that's a poor argument. Again, government have had this reputation for as long as I live to be, pretty lazy, pretty incompetent. My mom worked for a state agency after she left her job in New York, and she would get her work done by literally 9:30, and they would tell her just to chill out, don't worry. And then she finally got reprimanded for getting her work done by 9:30 in the morning because they were making the others look bad. Because my mom's kind of like me. We fire fast. We go fast, right? So government employees have earned this reputation. But again, it's not necessarily their fault because it's how the system works. And to quote Drucker again, you put good people in a bad system and the system will win, right? So we've kind of degraded this, and over time it just keeps degrading and getting worse. Got particularly worse, of course, during the pandemic. We now have employees, federal employees, who refuse to come to the office. I don't know if you saw the story about the new person who's running the SBA. She came there her first day of work. There was nobody in the office. They're all working from home. And what are they doing at home? Well, if they weren't working that hard at work, what are they doing at home? They're binging on Netflix. God knows who knows. There's something really wrong here. In fact, there are a lot of agencies that just require their employees to come to the office one day a month. I know this for a fact. I have some friends who do work with government agencies, and they have to plan their whole month about this person when they're a month. And they know, because they've been told, these folks aren't even living in D.C. They've kind of moved to Florida and parts on the outskirts because they don't have to live in D.C. because they don't have to come to the office. They don't even have to work that hard. So holy cow. So when you have fraud and waste and this stuff that goes on and people that are not accountability, it grows this culture and it just degrades, it just degrades, it just degrades. Why wouldn't it degrade? Okay. And even if you went there, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and you couldn't wait to serve the government and serve the people in time, you would just get ground down. All right, so I've said this before, but whose fault is it? It's not the federal employees. Actually, I feel for them, right? They have been just pawns in this game. They've been neglected, right? Not holding someone accountable is actually mean and punitive in the long run, because it's the bigotry of low expectations, right? You're saying, this kind of cruise, have a good life, but you better do what I tell you to do, and that's why they do this. And so you're not growing as a person, you're not growing as a professional as much as you could because the agencies are holding you back. So building a culture like the culture like most government agencies have is debilitating and demoralizing, right? But in general, you'll adjust to it. So Jung would say we have this contextual self. And in time, if you're in this really poor system, you just kind of, you fight it, they grind you down, then you kind of join it or you leave. But most people just kind of join it because it's the boiling of the frog. You don't even realize what's happening to you, right? And then you don't realize that your output is so low. It's kind of like, I don't know, if you were playing basketball, you started out playing basketball at the park with 8th graders, and then you grew up, and then you're in 12th grade, you're a senior in high school, and you're still playing with 8th graders. And you think, man, I'm dominating these 8th graders. I must be great. And then you're in college and you're still playing with 8th graders at the park. You're like, I'm fantastic. And then you go play to like a different park where they have grown people who play basketball a lot with other grown people. You get your butt whipped because you don't realize how slow you're moving. Because why? You've just been calibrating yourself against 8th graders. So that's what happens. I've hired government workers, and their biggest adjustment was the pace of private business, how to move fast, because government doesn't move fast. And you know that just experientially, you know that. So let me underscore though, government workers are not bad people, right? But again, if you know you're never going to get fired, you're not going to have a lot of fire in your belly for sure. All right. So it breeds all this stuff that comes out. So you have to go back to who created the culture. And again, it goes back to the leaders, the politicians, the political appointees. Just like in a public company and private corporations, leadership created this culture. Okay, so the leaders of these agencies through the years from all parties just have deteriorated the culture. And so when you have this culture of a lack of accountability, it creates a fat, bloated, slow-moving, ineffective entity, right? And that's what happens. Now, the sad thing is, all the leaders who've done this through the years, they've probably been promoted. They've been given bigger political jobs. They're doing okay. But the federal employees who were in the system, and I'm sure probably some of them tried to fight it, make it better, right? They're the ones who now their jobs are on the line, right? And again, most of their leadership who did this have moved on and have promoted to higher paying jobs for incredibly bad efforts. And also, I would throw in fraud and abuse for some of them. And their friends have benefited mightily from this because I'm sure they took care of their friends as well. But the people who work there are getting screwed. And that's why I feel bad for the government worker or the federal worker, because we're not really dealing with the issue here. The issue is, how is the government run? Not whether the federal workers are good or bad, right? They're good people. Okay, I would say most of them are good. Not all, but most of them are good. All right? Man, it just drives me nuts. I don't even want to talk about this right now. I'm getting angry about it. It's got to change, right? And so then you say, enter DOGE, right? And the DOGE thing is a tough one because everybody's like, we should be more surgical. I think things are so bad, you can't be surgical right now. You have to kind of hack. I think it's bad. I think the issue in the company, it's like getting a really bad cut and it gets infected. And instead of cleaning it up and putting medicine on it and putting a bandage on it, you just put a bandage on it. And then when it starts pussing, you put another bandage on it, then another bandage and another bandage. And at some point, you're going to lose your hand to gangrene, or your body's going to go into sepsis and you're going to die. And so what do you have to do? You have to kind of rip all these Band-Aids off, and then you got to scrub really hard and it hurts. And then you got to heal. And that's painful. The healing's painful if you've ever gone through this. It's very painful to come back from a highly infective wound. But that's what's going on. There's no surgery that will save that wound. You have to go in there. You have to rip off the multiple layers of bandages, and you have to scrub super, super hard. And so I think I think that's what's going on. I think there's a scrub. Would I like it to be done better? Yeah, because I like people. I always feel bad for the employee. Could they do better? I don't know. I don't know if they have the time to do better. Right? So is Elon doing it? He's utilizing AI. This could not have been done even 4 years ago without AI. Right? We keep talking about the super smart kids. Yes, they're super smart, but it's the AI they're really leveraging. So I don't know. I don't know. What I like to kind of see it being a little bit more surgical, a little bit more precise. Of course, right? People treated super fair, but it's so bad right now. I'm not sure that's possible. And this is a terrible analogy, so I apologize for it. But there's always that discussion about, okay, this is a crazy one. Just go with me, and I don't want to be offensive because it's not the same thing. So let me be clear, it's not the same thing. I'm just making a relative analogy. It's different in magnitude. But like during World War II, the bomb was dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was awful. If you've ever been there, it's terrible. The scarring of the land and the people is forever, and a lot of people died. But a lot of more people would have died if the bomb wasn't dropped. Okay, so it's terrible. What a terrible decision that had to be made, right? But there was a lot of collateral damage, but there was less damage in the long run because you had to make a brave move, not brave necessarily, but a bold move. So is this that bold move? It sure feels like it. So that's my take on it. So it is work trauma to the worst, right? It's work trauma because the powers that be, the leaders and the political leaders who have run these companies have used it, one, to make sure that they just stayed in charge and got promoted again, kept their title, got a bigger title, preserved their money, preserved their connections, and really just took advantage of the federal employee. So instead of developing them, caring about them, making sure they were good, making sure they were paid well so they kind of stay in line, right? That's really what they did. Let's stay in line. We'll pay you well, but you got to do what we tell you to do, which is a terrible way to live life, but not really developing them as leaders, as people, having a succession plan, et cetera, and then creating a culture of such low performance, and it's to the point where it's not tenable anymore. It's just not. At some point, a company, if it runs out of money, it can't pay the people. At some point, the government can print money only for so long, and it can't pay its workers. And then there's bigger issues than that in terms of the solvency of the United States. But that's for a different episode. So there you go. My take on DOGE, on work trauma, how corporations really work. In this episode, we talked about a very unique corporation called the U.S. federal government. So I hope that was helpful to help us think through. I hope we figure this out and we get things on track. And I do feel for the folks who are at risk of losing their job. So stay tuned for the rest of season 2 of Work Trauma, how corporations really work. And we got some really good guests coming on. I do some TED Talk takedowns because some TED Talks need to be taken down. And it should be pretty fun. We'll continue to explore behind the curtain how corporations really work so you can make better decisions about your life and your career. All right, we'll catch you next time.